Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? Welcome back, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, grannies and gators. I hope you guys had an amazing Thanksgiving weekend. Some folks were in here looking for me last night, but I even myself took a long weekend, got caught up on a bunch of stuff, got my gullet stuffed a few times. I'm still kind of suffering a turkey hangover, so I hope everybody had a nice little break from the insanity of clown world out there. We're going to go over to Abbotsford, British Columbia, for our story tonight. But just before we get to that, if you guys are new here, please don't be afraid to give us a like and a subscription. I'm pretty sure you're going to find all kinds of contentious, triggering, truthful dialogue in amongst our community and our platforms. And the best couple of places to find whatsupcanada.org every single day, Monday to Friday. We stream 7 o'clock Eastern, same time, same place. And then I publish everything that I use, all of the links, the documents, whatever goes with the story that we're covering the night before comes out on Substack the next day. Everything is free. Our content is always free, always will be free. If you choose to pick up a paid subscription over on Substack, that is how we keep this free for everybody. The best, fastest, easiest way to do that is to go to whatsupcanada.org, where you can find a couple of our amazing partners. We hear from Bryce at Neuro Precious Metals every Friday. You can get your Tower Gardens and our Patriot Switch, but this is where you plug in and you can get all of it here on our website. So tonight, special treat, we go to Abbotsford, British Columbia for a gentleman that I've only just seconds before got a chance to actually meet. Jim, thank you for finding some time to join us here. I think at this point, I probably know more about your story than you do about ours in our community here. So thank you for having the guts to come on a platform and talk about what is, to me, a very tiresome wedge issue subject that has gotten way out of control and in Canada. And I'm talking about the wedge issue, particularly of the Kamloops graves, and what the last bunch of years that has turned into an already existing problem that has existed here for a very long time. But unfortunately, not too many people want to have a talk about this. For me, this is personal. I grew up, and I got a chance to fill you in just briefly. I grew up in the middle of 9 reserves, and I have experienced very much a different life experience than the narrative that our government and our media and our educational institutions want to stuff down our throat. And I am filled up to here. So when I came across your story, Jim, I was compelled to pay attention, take some notes, and now finally we get to hear. But I'm going to let you kind of narrow it down from there, where we go from there. But to introduce you as a teacher that has been removed from the system because you will not perpetuate the lie. How's that for an intro?
Well, it's a fantastic intro, and I know about you, Wayne, and I'm just absolutely honored to be with you. This hour is going to go by very quickly. It's hard for me in some ways to know where to begin, but there are a couple of key points, and one of them is that I was the first in Canada to be punished for saying this is all a big lie. 215 kids murdered by Christian nuns and priests, and one school where they went to do their life's work. Many of them had to walk to get there. Long ago, more than half the school would have been staffed by Indigenous people, caretakers, residents, monitors, and cooks, and so forth. Right in the middle of the reserve, the one big building in the reserve. A lot of kids went home at the end of the day. And then right in the middle of Kamloops. So this idea that all of a sudden, oh my gosh, 215 dead children. Went around the world, New York Times, Washington Post, India Times, everywhere. And people are starting to say things like, oh, well, the Kamloops or the Kamloops band didn't say mass grave. They sure did say mass grave. They even said children as young, bodies as young as 3, so 3 years at residential school, and saying that 6-year-olds had to bury their classmates late at night. So this big secrecy. And then of course it's changed. But when that came out, I was expected to talk about it by my principal, May 31st, 2021. I did. The only thing I said, because I was very nervous, the only thing I said that I thought, that I felt caused upset. The only thing was that the kids weren't murdered; they died from disease. I was walked out by 2 principals, vice principals out of the school. I started getting angry, and I said, "It'd be easier for you guys to let me talk to the principal." The principal said nothing to me. It's just supposed to make sure anything. No one in my I was in school district said anything to me in 3.5 years. It's just what I did was so beyond the pale. And yet all I did was say something to the Truth and Reconciliation Report, which to me is very biased, but biased in the way that woke people would like, I suppose. And so anyhow, did nothing wrong. Never teach again. My regulatory body wants to cancel me for life. I get death threats. Life isn't in some ways easy, but I've never felt as important because on X I have almost 17,000 viewers, and I know some of those people are journalists, and so I feel I had recently a post that 1.3 million people saw. So I'm going to please you in the things I say tonight, but that's my intro. I'm a teacher who just says you don't lie to kids, and it doesn't matter who you are, you're not going to convince me to do otherwise. It's an area I know about. I went to graduate school for 7 years. I know all about Canadian educational history. So
for me, it's I've lived so much of this story, having grown up in the middle of 9 different reserves, and this is what makes it challenging. Is so I've seen this instilled, created, manifested, programmed, permanent victimhood, which has captured an entire culture, and it pays well. And I grew up under having a very different life living experience of what racism really was. I was a short, fat, bald-headed kid with glasses and a pocket protector, of about 5 white kids in amongst a bunch of native kids, and it was brutal. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I lived with it. I grew up with it. But I've seen this manifest itself into a 2-tier society. Special rules for thee, different rules for them. And what I learned is that most, and it's difficult to have these conversations because it's not all of the Indian people are like this, but there are some really corrupted individuals that have turned this into such a profitable wedge issue and destructive issue that is literally tearing our country apart. It bothers me to see Walmart making bank uh, on shirts to perpetuate a lie, especially when I know the truth. And if I know the truth, I'm just a northern swamp donkey. I am totally uneducated, but I could look into it, and I knew where how to discern the bullshit from the buckwheats, to be straight up about it. And then I sent you an article as well from a good friend of mine, William Ray, who went through the actual investigation, talked to the people that rented this so-called ground penetrating radar. But William exposed all of it. He provided some actual tangible evidence to discount all of this, but yet we still are staring down the barrel of now a denialism law, which would send you and me to jail for denying this event that happens, and more hundreds of millions of dollars being extorted by those small groups of bands or leaders or chiefs or whoever it is that have taught the entire culture almost that victimhood pays well. So I get triggered and I'm going to say things that are going to be contentious, but at the end of the day, this all comes from a love of Canada. I am no colonial. I am not a capitalist. I didn't do anything to anybody. I love the Indian people, and I use that word specifically out of respect to the ones that know the truth and they don't buy into this UN UNDRIP agenda of indigenous makes them special. The rest of us are slaves now. I was born here. I'm as indigenous as they are. So I do this out of respect and love because they're literally destroying us all over this conversation. So I get kind of into the weeds on this, and I wasn't sure how I was actually gonna deal with this. Bringing you onto my show, Jim, it's kind of a triggering subject for me. If you can't tell how I really feel.
Well, first of all, I would like to challenge you on anything that you say, Wayne, that I disagree with, because that's my nature, and I have an authority to do so. But nothing you've said I disagree with. So I think it's a really dangerous time. They want to reinvent feudalism or apartheid and creates two classes of citizens. I think I just think it's the most upsetting thing imaginable. But what your viewers might find interesting, I think, is the fact that nobody cares in the school system. There's not a single teacher or principal or senior manager or anybody in the school system, education official, right across Canada who's ever reached out to me in 3.5 years and said, well, Jim, we know you're right. We know there are no bodies in Kamloops or anywhere else. We know there's no evidence of murderous teachers. We know the police are not investigating because right away they said, well, there's nothing here. It's obviously a septic trench. And the archaeologist report is sealed, and it's just, you can't fly even drones over you. It's just all, anyhow, fences and roadblocks, and
it's all become Area 51.
So that's right. So there's just absolutely no way. So my father died recently, and one of the last things I was able to talk to him about regarding my own situation, which I didn't go into very often, was just asking him some advice. So he was the Chief Justice of Ontario at one time, and he looked at me, a much bigger man than I, and I kind of thought he was always this lovely father bear kind of figure. I thought, Jim, if anybody goes after you, I'm gonna I'm gonna get out of this sick bed. That's how my father was for most of my life. But as he got older and became more imbued with what Canadian values and recognized that he, to some extent, represented Canada to some extent as an Order of Canada recipient, and somebody was involved in the patriation of the Constitution in 1981 and 82. So he was the guy that in some ways saw me as important, but even more important was getting at the truth. So that's what he said to me. He said to me, if you're wrong, Jim, then I'm going to tell you you're wrong. But if you're right, that's all that should matter. And that's an old judge speaking. You weigh the facts. There are no facts. There's nobody around saying, there's no kid or teacher going around. We need to have land acknowledgements every day in school. There's probably not many people going around with any sense that are saying, oh, yes, there's all these dead kids and missing children. My gosh, you've got commission upon a commission about missing children, a current one with Kimberly Murray, the special independent interlocutor, blah, blah, blah. Of course, she hasn't found a single missing kid in 2 years, and she's asking for more money and to extend even further. It's absolutely absurd. So the whole thing is a canard. There's just nothing about this is true. The men and women that did these schools, any kid that went to residential school is because there wasn't a day school handy, or because mom and dad put an application in for the kid. The ones that were forced, that was something that no one talked about 10, 15, 20 years ago, because that's an absurdity, because kids wanted to be educated. Their parents wanted them educated. And some kids in remote areas didn't have any alternative. And people go, oh, we should never rip kids away from their parents. I'm going, not many, and from the arms of their parents, not many kids at 7 or 8 or 9 are still in the arms of their parents. But the ridiculous thing is they're still doing that. There's an article in the National Post a couple of days ago about kids that live in the Arctic and other areas that remain very isolated. They still get shipped away to go to high school. So there's just nothing about this whole narrative that makes any sense to me. So I didn't know much about you coming in. I just heard good things. But I was kind of hoping that you were challenging me and said, well, there's something about you, McMurtry. You got fired. You say all these things that are provocative and so forth. But what about this or what about that? And that's fine for me because there's just absolutely nothing to support a narrative of abuse or mistreatment. And yet, obviously, there's cases of that as there are at every school. My gosh, recently in my own school, a kid died at the school playing basketball. Kids die back in time, tuberculosis and measles and meningitis and diphtheria, there are all sorts of diseases that took children's lives prematurely and tragically. So what I want to do in the time that I'm with you, as you permit me, is just to answer any tough question that you might have, Wayne, because I can't think of a single thing to justify what we're doing in Canada. Separating people on the basis of race. You talked about hundreds of millions of dollars. Conrad Black, who's a very esteemed senior statesman in Canada, he wrote an article a year ago. He said since Confederation, it's about $4.6 trillion that is being given over. It's $30 billion a year just for 2 federal departments. But there's the provinces and municipalities. There's all other programs in the federal. There's so many organizations that are giving money to one group of people, and they're still the poorest. So I think the very best way to make anyone successful is to get rid of the communism on these reserves. You allow people to own property. You treat them with the same respect others have. You don't give them breaks that you're not giving others. You don't judge people on your skin color. There's nothing wrong with Indigenous culture. If the people, like any people of any culture, if the people themselves were left to their own devices, but that's not what we're doing. We're saying, oh, no. They need to live apart from us back in time as hunter-gatherers, foragers. It's just the most absurd, and that's what we teach in school about how to make a bone fish hook and so forth, thinking that we're helping Indigenous people. What's wrong with Indigenous culture, and there's so much that's right about it, and I think proud people, it's extraordinary that they managed to survive in the tough, rough and tumble landscape that we know as Canada. And so I, as a child, I was enamored by anything I could get my hands on regarding Native or Indigenous history. But now they've got real problems and have had for generations with fetal alcohol syndrome, with people taking serious drugs like fentanyl. My own nephew died taking fentanyl from a drug dealer from a nearby reserve. There's suicide, there's domestic violence, there's incest, there's unemployment. There's so many problems. And all what we're doing right now, when they talk about the crap, about the best way to treat this group is to make them into some sort of superhuman race that, oh, by the way, when they lived back in time, they did everything right. And we were all these horrible, anti-environmentalist butchers and so forth. So I think what we need to do right now is stop and say a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. And if we don't proceed on that basis, then you got a problem with me. And it looks like you got a problem with you too, because I don't think as a teacher. So again, that's me. I don't think, I'm being told all the time, wherever I go in the educational world, that I got to treat kids differently on the basis of their sexuality, on their basis of their race or their religion, all things like that. And I say to anybody, I said, over my dead body, I'm not going to treat a child on the basis of something that's a birth characteristic or something that the child can't do anything about. I don't see those things. What I see is inside the child. I see a soul. I see somebody who's wanting to be able to make it in this world. And I do what I can to help that child. So all this group, race, politics is just horse shit. You should be seeing people as individuals. I didn't raise my kids because on the basis of any external quality. If someone was doing something wrong, I'd say, hey, stop it now. If someone's doing something great in my family, I'd say, fantastic. That's what we should focus on.
This has been gotten to a point with the capture of the institutions. before I got into this space, I was never political. I just took my lumps, fought back where I could, and carried on living. But we've gotten to a point where, and this is why it scares me so much, and we'll get into some more critical issues here that you're taking on. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on here with that. But the programming and the institutionalization of these identity politics. This is not new. This has been adapted and improvised and perfected within the Indian communities, and they have devastated them. It's the same principles as these safe drug sites. They keep throwing money at the problem, enhancing what they project into the reserves, and they're literally killing these people, their hopes, their dreams, and yeah, this is all part of the problems of this. And this uh, what ticks me off is all of these movements pick a convenient date in history to launch their assaults on the people's moralities and cultures from, and pretend like nothing happened. They were, they were exactly that. They were the perfect people before their own people signed them off to foreign conquistadors, which is basically come full circle, and they're doing it again right now through these foreign unelected policies that they're now capturing the lands back, and the, they're doing it again, selling it off to the foreign conquistadors. And BC has been a hotbed, particularly of this granting of these, new agreements and amendments. And this is where it gets interesting, because you've taken a run at politics here now, and you're starting with a campaign against the land acknowledgements. And I cannot tell a lie, Jim. I had the biggest inner cheer when you finally addressed this subject, because there is nothing that assaults or insults me more than being forced to listen to this, never mind with the implication that if I don't agree and recite it in lockstep harmony, well, I must be a racist colonial. Well, that's a GFY in a loud booming voice for me, but I felt very alone in my opposition to all of this. But tell us your thoughts on that, from the land agreements, and then moving into the political realm,
Yeah. And just
if you
before I
will.
do, I just want to say it's such a delight to listen to you, Wayne. I believe so fundamentally in everything that you're saying and doing. The land acknowledgement, my case broke about a year after I was let out and told that I'll never teach again, by Rebel News, by a Black and small part Indigenous reporter named Drea Humphrey.
Yep.
You probably know.
Drea.
And so she talked about my case and thought it was outrageous and so forth. And we hit it off. And she phoned me up a short while later, and she said, "Jim, would you do a video with me against land acknowledgements?" So this was, it came out in almost 2 years ago. And I said to her, Drea, my issue is the indoctrination in schools. You can't say a boy is a boy or a girl is a girl, because the teachers are all saying, well, maybe you should change. Maybe you should, mutilate yourself and become sterile for life. And who needs to have a family anyway? Anyhow, this stuff's happening in schools, with not just with gender and trans stuff and race, indigenization, censorship of literature, falsification of history, lowering academic standards, dispensing of all traditional, just completely making Canada into a monstrous place. And the worst of all is Christianity. And you open your mouth as a teacher, particularly in Abbotsford, but in many places across Canada, and you say anything good about Christianity, that could get you in trouble. On the other hand, if you say anything bad about Islam, that can get you in trouble. In other words, you can only say bad things. So my grandson came home from school last Easter, and came over on last Easter, and I said, "What did you learn in school about Easter?" Yeah, I just tried to engage the guy. He was a 7-year-old, and he said, "Oh, I learned that you don't eat and drink for a month." And I said, no, that's Ramadan. That's something else. And then everything he said was about Muslim traditions. And I said, but it's Easter. Do you know anything about Easter? And I told, sure, he didn't hear anything. Oh, but he heard a lot in school. So it's a general assault. So Drea came to me and she said, about land acknowledgement, I said, Drea, I don't think I'm the right person. Like I want to be known as one thing, the teacher that just didn't take a knee. And I got fired for it, and no one's going to make me say anything other than what I'm going to say at any time. And that is, you don't manipulate children in school, particularly, drag queens and some of the sexual stuff they're bringing in, teaching them about fellatio and cunnilingus and all sorts. It's just incredible. And so what I said to her is, I said, look, that's my identity. That's who I am. So I'm not sure I'm the person. And she said to me, but there's nobody else. And I said, what do you mean? She said, there's nobody else I've met in Canada that's willing to go on air and criticize land acknowledgements. And I said to her, well, then I'm in. And so that was 2 years ago. And then here I am, fast forward, I go in front of an all candidates meeting. I know it's hard to win because I can't win you can't win easily if you're not in a political party. But if you go in a political party, you lose your identity and you get crushed, as you know, into this one little, these crazy little messages that are simplistic and often stupid. And because otherwise the leader's going to kick you out. So when it is independent, not any chance of winning, but I thought, but it's a platform and I have something important to say. And then I started asking people, I said, of all the issues that now I represent, because there's others, I'm a proud Canadian. I stand for the trucker convoy. I try to stand against the COVID restrictions. I stand, for Christianity. I stand for all these different things. And it doesn't matter where I am, who I am. I'm just saying these are issues that I stand for in Canada. Proud Canadian like you are. And so what's interesting for me with the land acknowledgement thing is that so I asked people, I said for all these different things. I'm against any brutal treatment of women. I'm against anything, this in schools where they're giving advantages, scholarships and university entrance preference and so on to kids based on race and gender, against all sorts of things. What is it they should talk about in the 1 minute that I have at the all candidates meeting to stand up, which I had filmed? And the consensus was, of the people that I talked to, land acknowledgements. And I won't say why, because you've already said that. But the one thing that maybe people don't recognize is if you're in a classroom, you talked earlier about being one of a few kids, white kids, in a big majority of another group. Well, schools now are different in certain areas. So I actually live in Surrey. I taught in Abbotsford. And Surrey is even more glaring, where you can have one white kid or no white kids in the classroom. But if you have one white kid in the classroom, all the others are going to be something else. And you got to be really careful about who you're picking on. And so if you pick on that one kid and say, look, your ancestors, stole land or did terrible things, committed genocide, that's hard actually on the one white kid. Conversely, if you've got a lot of kids who are recent immigrant from places like Syria or Ukraine, really all over the world, they come often as refugees. And even if not as refugees, they've come because they weren't able to stay where they were. And to listen daily about how, you're in Canada, but you're not really in Canada. You're in Turtle Island. You're in somebody else's place. And it's just a matter of time before I give it back and send you packing. That's really upsetting to 6-year-olds and 16-year-olds who have just lived being dispossessed of everything that they had in their motherland. So I think the people that do that, so I started claiming that land acknowledgement long ago, and I really hurt me, and I never got promoted in the public school system, although previously I was a principal, private school system, but they didn't like me at all because I was thinking. They don't want teachers to think about anything. And I said that to them. You can't tell people that they don't have rights in Canada. And I'd like people to say that to my dad when my dad was around. because my dad would look at them in the eye. Again, this really big ex-football guy, and he'd say, "Are you kidding me? We have something that's called the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. If you don't like it, get the hell out." That's how my father talked. Because he cared about everybody. Everybody has rights. And this idea of putting us all into groups and saying, well, your group, Jim, by the way, you're a white, straight, male, able-bodied Christian, all these terrible things. No. You don't do that. You don't do that to anybody or any group. You give everybody a sense of protection in Canada.
Everybody's fighting for their extra, their extra rations, their extra social credit points. This is literally, a society in a tailspin when you've got that level of Marxism. It's, the next thing on the docket is they'll be fighting for their extra ration of potatoes, and this is, for me. I had my great revelation in 2019, where I realized that all of the suffering in Canada was manifested at the hands of the government, playing our people against our own people in the majority of cases. And the Indigenous were primary, or the natives were primary facilitators of that, because they've always, at the drop of a hat, been able to create and manifest a political crisis, a political situation to divide our people even more. And I knew it was, so much of it was a lie. And so for me in 2019, that was a big realization, where I realized, knowing what was coming down the pipe, doing what I do for a living, if we don't drop all of these little squabbles about our little extra, I don't give a shit what pronoun you use. If it's completely irrelevant if we are all in the graveyards together, right? So it doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is where we are right here, right now, and what we're up against. And if we don't stand for and support the country we live in, Canadians that are here and do believe in that have got to make some hard decisions and tell some of these people, if you don't support the country you live in, go live in the country you do support. And we need to come back to some difficult conversations and eliminate some of these lies, so that we can actually get to some form of reconciliation on what being Canadian actually even means. And that divisive government saying we have no core identity, and then attacking and creating this, this disparity of extra, is actually created to us, and it's absolutely our doom. And I'm going to pull up this quote just because it's so pertinent. Our system has completely failed to bring justice, but if we don't figure this out, we'll never have a future based on injustice. Oops, sorry. And that's kind of where we're at, and why I am so adamant. Hate me if you want, but we're going to have this discussion.
Well, hate me, not you. We're
And I'm speaking metaphorically to, hopefully the broader thousands that see might.
But you know what? One day there are going to be a lot more people like me. But I hit a point and made it very clear that I will, including my process right now. So I'm involved in 2 legal processes against my employer and my regulator. My government's trying to get after me in other ways. Again, I'm getting death threats. I'm getting all sorts of people are after me. And there's no pronouns in my life. There's no land acknowledgements. There's no woke ritual whatsoever that I believe, again, one of the rights in Canada is the freedom, the right to have one's own conscience. And I don't, talking to most people, I kind of fit in. I think I'm a pretty regular Canadian. And if people want to fire a pretty regular Canadian from the school system, then the school system is going to have to answer for that. And it's going to. So my case is going to be part of that. But certainly what you're doing and many other Canadians is doing as well. The observation that you made, if I may just come back to it, that was most sterling for me so far, and there are many, is a little bit of an allusion to the Orwellian story, George Orwell's story of Animal Farm, where you had a class of people who abused the farmers abusing the animals, and the animals rose up. And then all of a sudden you had one group of the animals They ended up taking the place of the former farmers and being just as abusive as before. So you've got your point, which is so brilliant, was that you're saying Indigenous people, their narrative is that they were all victims, which is not true at all. And they still own great swaths of land in Canada. But this idea that they were victimized and these European people and others came in. And what they did was, they took everything away from us and they ruled over us anyhow. Well, that's what the Indigenous people are wanting today. So they're all of a sudden wanting to have all the rights and all the land and have people just throw their tax money at them. And so made reference to the land acknowledgement video that I did with Rebel News and Drea Humphrey. There's one part of it where she speaks to this, brings up full circle, because you began asking me about the Kamloops 215, and she asked, she said, okay, to the chief, Roseanne Casimir, she said, okay, so what do you want? And the chief looks at her and she said, we want the land back. And she said, why? Okay, but there are other people here in Canada too. What about them? And she said, I don't care. We want all the land back.
All the land. Operative word.
All of Canada.
And
so this is what we've created. We've created like the Frankenstein, the scientist who creates the monster Frankenstein, and all of a sudden it's something gets out of his control, so he has to try and kill it. Well, Indigenous people are looking for a better future. And I want that for them and for anybody in Canada. But we're not going to do it for them or for ourselves. If we are creating the illusion in their minds that everything is theirs, and we are just settler Canadians that have to serve them forever and ever.
That's the objective. That's the goal. That's the lie that's been given to them by these unelected foreign entities in Switzerland, in Davos, and New York. That's the process that these useful. I don't like the word idiots, but this is the useful pattern that they're literally repeating through gobbledygook. And a few select people think that they're going to get what they want, and they legitimately don't care one iota. You brought up something there a little bit earlier that so I had one of the most unusual and disturbing experiences this past Friday, because I guess I never felt like a persecuted Christian so much, other than by the radical left in our country. But just this past Friday, I spent 25 minutes trying to defend myself by making the statement that Canada was a Christian nation in a so-called leadership community steering meeting with 150 of the Canadian Resistance's most high-profile leadership. That me posting in there the opening line from our Charter of Rights and Freedoms was not acceptable, and how dare I bring God into the conversation. And this is what we're truly up against by this now. Even the resistance, the opposition side, is falling prey to this. I don't even know what to call it anymore. This programming that makes it okay to bash Christianity. And if we continue to see this and allow this, this is what they're embracing. And this is that same programming that we're seeing manifested and put at scale across all of the battles that we're trying to get back to the center of reality on.
Yeah, a couple of things here. First of all, when you say bashing, I'd say worse in that way. They're telling kids right across Canada in every classroom that Christians murdered thousands, if not tens of thousands, of little children at school secretly after torturing them, put them on hooks, put them in incinerators, burn them alive, drown them, hang them. this is what they're telling to little kids. So it's more than bashing. So another thing you said there, allow me to jump on, you talked about, and then I want to come back to this thing about indigenous. You talked about being a Christian country. If anyone would ever read Canadian history, they realize that all the good stuff that happened back in time, the churches, the schools, the places where people did the charity for the indigenous people who were the biggest part of the population, were the Jesuits and the Ursuline nuns. And so this idea that we're not a Christian country, I would say, well, do you know anything about Canada 400, 300, 200 years ago? Because it doesn't seem like you do. The last thing I want to quickly say here is, you said earlier on, so I'm listening to everything you're saying and fascinated by it, but you said something that nobody dares say. You said, I'm an Indigenous Canadian because I was born here, my family and all that kind of stuff. And I can trace my family back hundreds of years in Canada. So I feel the same way. Now, the Indigenous thing is interesting because you also mentioned the UN. The UN has, you can get it, it has charts of all the Indigenous people in the world. And everywhere in the world, China and South America and obvious Africa, anyhow, everywhere in the world, there's Indigenous people. But there are no Indigenous people in Europe. And you go, oh, we just came out of North. So not only are they saying to us these stupid names like racialized, as though we don't have a race, and we're not visible. We're not a visible minority. We're invisible. But they're saying we're not Indigenous to Canada. And people are buying into it. And you go, well, then, okay. So can I go back to my place, let's say Scotland, and say, hey, everybody, I own the land here and I get special rights, or I just can come over and be a citizen because, look, I'm Indigenous. It doesn't work that way. But more importantly, the people at the UN and all these other talking heads who, including in the elite in Canada, would say, well, Jim, you aren't Indigenous. You have no background. And I just think, couldn't it be anything more insulting than to say, like in 1984, they erased people's memory of the past. What they're doing with current Canadians is they're erasing all our, who are white and European, they're erasing all our ancestors.
Well, this is all connected. All of these things, right from the faith in Christianity to the United Nations, which is the enemy of Christianity. And one of the things that you said there, Jim, was when you talked about what they're really accusing Christians and white people of here in Canada, that creates that that baseline acceptance that makes it okay for them to burn down 130 churches in Canada. Where is the core of our Canadian history and culture embedded in? Exactly in those, those Christian and Catholic institutions that are being exterminated, and to say anything to defend that is now becoming easy target from both sides of the fence. And this is one of the strangest experiences of my life for, in a country like Canada, where it says recognizing the supremacy of God right in the beginning of our, identifying papers of our country, that this is not a safe discussion, and people that are supposed to be fighting for freedom, for truth, for free speech against compelled speech now immediately wants to compel my speech because of the foundational culture of our country. I can't make it make sense anymore, Jim.
Recently, there was a knife attack in a Quebec mosque. Mm-hmm. And within, it seemed minutes, Trudeau, Poilievre, all the leaders are standing up and saying, this should never happen. People should feel safe. And the word safe is important to me. I'm going to come back to it with something else. Safe in Canada. And so this became so important, they're talking about it right away in the House of Commons. And it turns out it's a fellow Muslim. And so there's nothing to do, and so it died because, oh, shoot, only there was a black-hatted evil Christian or European. Anyhow, you get all these churches being torched right across Canada, and you're not even seeing arrests. No. And so it's just, two weights and measures. So the thing that again, so many wonderful points you brought up, safety, what they do. So I'm sitting in a house where I had Thanksgiving with all these people over la-di-da the other day. And with my own family and with my in-laws, it's the same thing. I can't talk about anything that we've talked about because right away I'm making people feel uncomfortable, unsafe, offended. I'm a racist, I'm this, that, and everything else. And so I just didn't talk, and I did a lot of dishes, and it's the same again with my own family. And I'm mostly in-laws out here on the coast. So it's just a fascinating thing. So their great argument is if you say something that is truthful, but someone on the other side isn't served by it, doesn't benefit, such as if you say, well, you know what, 215 kids weren't murdered. You think the indigenous tribe will go, yay, yay, and Trudeau, yay, kids were not murdered at these residential schools. Isn't that wonderful? It's the opposite. They're so disappointed that they haven't found bodies, that they're just spending billions more to find bodies. They're going to spend billions forever finding bodies. They're going to create bodies. They're going to be putting bodies in the ground and go, hey, everybody, look, there's a body here. So it's this idea that it's all upside down. And what they use, the only argument these people use is, I'm offended by your truth. And I've even been told in my own case that in the termination letter of me, it didn't say, here's the message, that I was inflammatory, insensitive, and inappropriate by saying disease and not murder. And by doing so, and here's the key part, I went against the school district's message of condolences and reconciliation. And I paused for a second, and when I saw that, and I said to people, they took out truth. They took out they themselves, they're getting me. They know I said truth. They know I said truth. And then they looked into a little bit, and they know that I was right. So their way of getting at me, they can't say I was untruthful, but they say that I wasn't giving condolences when news broke of all these murdered children in a mass grave, because it said mass grave at the time. Yep. By not saying mass grave, murder, all this sort of stuff, that I wasn't showing condolences. I wasn't showing fealty. I wasn't, whatever, showing repentance. That's a little bit unfair for me, because quite frankly, that's not my job as a teacher. I was supposed to.
You hit the right word there, the fealty. The emperor has no clothes when it comes to this story, Jim, and how dare you identify that, right? And this is the gravy train of the extortion that pisses me off so badly, because Canadians are suffering across this country, and there's absolutely no excuse for it, and all Canadians are suffering, I think, unless they have accepted the fealty and they do follow, and kiss the ring of the emperor while they're staring at his naked crotch, because that's literally what they're doing, and trying to build their future on a lie. And they haven't got the memo yet that insanity is unsustainable, and they somehow think the alligator's going to eat them last. And that kind of stuff really triggers me. And so I was reading a headline here today, another 600 million for this reserve, another 600 million for the ox and horse issue. What the heck? This is again more bribery and blackmail to toe the story, to launder the money to the select group of few that make bank off of the lie. And so as long as there is only one of you, Jim, they can continue to make bank. Well, now there's two of us, Jim, and it's going to be even more difficult. And I know that we're not even alone in this. So the last 10 minutes we've got here, what are you seeing differently in expressing your conscience and the truth now versus a couple of years ago? And do you have faith that we can crack this lie at some point coming up? I don't, it doesn't matter. I'm going to keep doing it anyways. I got the here, hold my beer and watch me. I mean, I literally walked around in high school for 3 weeks with a Nike imprint on my face because I wouldn't toe the lie. So bring it. What do you got for us? Close,
Well,
the
one
last
image that
year.
comes to mind, I just again loving this, that this what schools do right across Canada to teachers is they say, "Oh, Orange Shirt Day is coming up, and National Day," and he said, we recommend that all teachers, wear orange shirt, or say something like that. We ask that teachers wear orange. It's not a right for employer to dress the teachers, and they do that all sorts of colors. There's green, environmental. I won't go through. Sorry, white, brown, black, pink. Anyhow, there's so many different colors that you purple that you wear at different times of year as a teacher to show your fealty again to the new woke ideology. And so I just would love your viewers to imagine me going into a school as I did the last day I taught. I didn't get the memo, so it wasn't intentional. But I wouldn't wear orange. That's just me. I don't do any of this stuff because I again, as my son said to me, I said, "What should I do?" And they said this years ago. And he said, "Dad, would you rather die on your feet or live like a slave on your knees?" And I said, "Well, I choose the former." And he said, "Then you know the answer." And so I've lived that way. I live true to my conscience, and I'm a good person, and I feel that. So I just would love your viewers to imagine for a second, and you went walking into a school where every single person, and it's not just orange shirts. There was face makeup orange. There was stuff on their hair that was orange, and leggings and wristbands, just banners. Everything was orange. And here comes this older white teacher teaching calculus 12. And then the principal stops and says, "Well, like all the teachers, stop what they're doing and talk about residential schools." And of course, later, all the members of parliament in October 27, 2022 said residential schools were genocide. All of them said that, all our federal parliamentarians. So there I was, not wearing orange. It is tough. It is tough to be in a situation. So you said that was me and you kind of looking around, but there's more people. Of course, there are more people. I think it's a silent majority. But unless more people start to reach out, first of all, that listen to people like you and me, and not just the people who are saying, "Oh, no, it was genocide." Listen to the counter argument, because they'll very quickly make up their mind that it is just complete nonsense. There's just nothing to it. The next thing to do, if parents where I live, 2 nearby high schools had drag queens just last year. Drag queens coming to school. Is that really being very sexual? And when a man does that, it's a sexual. He's pleasuring himself, dressing up as a woman and being sexual in front of kids. And so this has gotten so serious in schools. So I know there's so little time left, but what I would say is, if you want to learn more about my story, I'd love people to check out my home feed and more about your story. My gosh, yours is far more fascinating than mine, particularly as a child. But learn, see that, and then act, and just say, as I said recently in a video that played well, I said, just say no. I know I sound like Nancy Reagan saying no to drugs long ago, but just say no. No, I'm not going to be part of any more ritual dance charade on behalf of people who are not serving Indigenous people. They don't care about Indigenous people. They're just virtue signals. They're just trying to promote themselves, who don't care about ordinary Canadians, who want to take away our land, who want to demean us, who want to remove any sense of pride in our past and in our ancestors. Say no to them. I'm worse than that. I say more than no. I say, how dare you say that to me? But let's talk facts. And so if more Canadians would join us, it would end in a second. But people are afraid. People, look at the Law Society in BC. It recently said, we're not going to take out the lie about Kamloops 215 because the majority voted not to take it out, because law firms don't want to have native, because there's so much money in native lawsuits. So they don't want to anger them. So what you're doing is you're getting lawyers who are supposed to uphold the law, who went all those years in law school to learn about natural justice, voting to keep a lie in their training materials because it serves them to do that. But it doesn't serve children. It doesn't serve ordinary Canadians. So if anyone walks away from this little broadcast with me, I want them to know I'm a teacher that does what's right. Damn the torpedoes. And if more Canadians started to do that and say, we all know what's right, why don't we act on our principles?
Well, I before we close out here, I gotta pull up your X page where people can find you. I've tagged your link all in all of the platforms, and I'll do it again. But it's one simple question undoes the lie. Where are the bodies? And that's a great place to start. I caught your video. I think it was at Tim Hortons with a donut, asking the question and doing it from a place of love and to do what's right, not what's easy. And that's really all it's going to take, is enough of us to realize that it's not our responsibility to prostrate ourselves for a lie or a delusion or a fallacy. And it doesn't matter whether it's some I got to watch the words because the algorithms will pick it up, but men that like to enjoy themselves playing with themselves for children, it's not my responsibility to coddle them, pat them on the back, and say, good liar, good liar, good liar. No. I won't do that, and I won't do that any more so for the land acknowledgements than I will for any other devious thing in Canada. So, as much as you might think you are just an average Canadian, Jim, you got one little thing, at least maybe a little bit more of a dose of one of those things than what many other do right now, and that's just a little bit more conviction and courage. So I thank you so much for that, and for joining me and our community here for a great opportunity to have a legitimate discussion about an unnecessary and contentious subject. So maybe we'll do it again soon and take another stab at this. Keep us posted on how the politicking goes in British Columbia, the land of that they have most captured and sent the most precedents so far. And pray for your safety too, Jim.
The best thing about this interview, Wayne, was for me meeting you. So thank you.
Well, you're part of the community now. We don't have an audience. We have a community, and we try our best to look after each other from coast to coast and beyond. So I hope you get a lot more support in what you're bringing to the table, because, honestly, guys, Jim is way better at articulating the facts and the teaching behind all of this. All I've got is Swamp Donkey triggered to go on. So make sure you guys get out there and follow Jim on his X page, and we'll talk again soon, Jim. If you're ever way out in the heart of the beast, you let me know, and we'll have to get together. It'd be great to shake your hand.
Thank you.
All right, you take care, Jim. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, grannies and gators, that was a conversation that I had thought about for quite some time, and very honored, delighted to to be able to have while we still have our ability to speak to some of the things that are going on. And so tomorrow we're going to probably get back into a few more of the clown show shenanigans by our inverted, captured hashtag WEF Fourth Reich Stasi in Ottawa. But so until then, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, yeah, I guess final cleanup here on some of that stuff. If you have subscribed, thank you. If you have hit that like, thumbs up, or a heart, thank you as well. Make sure you get plugged in to the Substack tomorrow. Jim's links will be in there, and maybe if I'm lucky, he'll send me the ones that he's done with Drea Humphrey from Rebel. I met Drea briefly. I think she's great. I look forward to maybe being able to add that in the Substack for tomorrow. If you have something that we need to know about, or a whistleblower, or something else that you think is newsworthy, by all means, send me an email, contact@whatsupcanada.org. And we do not get any kind of corporate funding or government funding. If you want to help us keep this free for everybody else out there, this is the best way to do that. And as you guys know, I encourage everybody every day to support your independent journalists, the ones that are brave enough to go into the corners and take the licks. They are the ones that are doing the honest work of trying to hold the corruption and the corrupt to account. So whoever that might be, whoever your favorite journalist is, make sure that you give them support. I know Mo Cabarazan's got some crazy stuff coming at him here now as well. So is still some good ones out there. So I love you all. Stay mighty. We will see you same time, same place tomorrow. And check out my supply chain interruption insurance friends over at Patriot Switch. See you tomorrow.